In the ancient land of Uz, there lived a man named Job. He was known for his righteousness, his honesty, and his unwavering faith in God. Job's life, though seemingly ordinary, was extraordinary in its piety. Job's righteousness was evident in his blessings. His wealth was vast, with flocks dotting the landscape. But Job's greatest treasure was his family. He was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters. Job cherished these moments, these precious gatherings that affirmed the blessings in his life. Every morning Job would rise and offer burnt offerings for each of his children, a testament to a father's unwavering love. High above the earth, in the celestial realms, a grand assembly took place. Among them stood Satan, the adversary. The Lord posed a question. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan questioned the purity of Job's faith, implying it was merely a transaction. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has?" Satan continued. "But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and surely he will curse you to your face." The Lord responded, "Everything he has is in your power, but do not lay a hand on the man himself." With a malevolent grin, Satan departed from the heavenly court. The fate of Job hung in the balance, his faith about to be tested. The sun rose over Uz, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. Job was at home, his heart filled with gratitude as he offered his morning prayers. Suddenly the doors burst open, and a figure stumbled into the room. "My lord," the oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were grazing nearby, when the Sabaeans attacked. They made off with them and killed the servants with the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job's heart pounded in his chest, a cold dread spreading through him. Before Job could fully process the devastating news, another servant stumbled into the room. Fire from heaven fell and burned up the sheep and the servants. As the second messenger fell silent, a third figure emerged from the doorway. This servant, covered in dust and blood, could barely stand, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels. They made off with them and killed the servants. I alone have escaped to tell you." As he sat there, numb with shock, a 4th messenger appeared at the doorway. "Your sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house. The house collapsed on them, and they are all dead." Job, his heart pounding in his chest, leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. "A mighty wind swept in from the desert," the messenger continued. "The house collapsed on them, and they're all dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Job tore at his clothes, ripping the fine robes from his body. He shaved his head, a ritual of mourning. And then, to the astonishment of those who watched, Job fell to the ground and bowed his head in prayer. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart," he declared. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away," Job continued. "May the name of the Lord be praised." In the midst of his suffering, Job found solace in his faith. He had lost everything, but he refused to let go of his faith. The scene shifted back to the heavenly realms, where the angels once again assembled before the throne of God. Satan, his features etched with a mixture of frustration and malice, stood apart from the celestial host. "Have you considered my servant Job?" the Lord boomed. "He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him without reason." "Skin for skin," Satan retorted. "A man will give all he has for his own life." "Stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones," Satan challenged, his eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation, "and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord, his expression unreadable, considered Satan's words. "Very well," the Lord finally responded. "He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." Satan wasted no time in carrying out his cruel task. His dark presence descended upon the land of Uz like a plague. Job, his body racked with pain, sat outside the city gates, his once fine robes replaced by rough sackcloth, his skin covered in festering sores. The once prosperous man, the envy of his neighbors, was now a pariah, an object of pity and disgust. Even his closest friends and family turned away from him, unable to bear the sight of his suffering. His wife, her face etched with grief and despair, watched helplessly as her husband endured unimaginable agony. She had lost everything: her children, her home, her comfortable life, and now she watched as the man she loved, the man who had always been her rock, her protector, crumbled before her eyes. "Are you still maintaining your integrity?" she cried out, her voice raw with pain and frustration. The weight of their shared suffering, the loss of their children, the destruction of their lives, had taken its toll on her, pushing her to the brink of despair. "Curse God and die," she implored him, her words a mixture of anguish and anger. In her pain, she saw no purpose in Job's continued suffering, no reason for him to cling to his faith in a God who seemed to have abandoned them. But Job, his voice weak but steady, his spirit unbroken despite the agony that consumed him, gently rebuked his wife. "You are talking like a foolish woman," he said, his words a testament to the depth of his faith, his unwavering belief in God's goodness, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" he asked her, his words a reminder that life is not without its trials, that even the most devout are not immune to pain and loss. Job recognized that his suffering was not a punishment, but a test, an opportunity to demonstrate the depth of his faith, the unwavering nature of his love for God. Job's faith, forged in the crucible of suffering, shone even brighter against the backdrop of his physical and emotional torment. He refused to curse God, refused to give in to despair, his spirit a beacon of hope in the midst of the darkness that had enveloped his life. News of Job's plight spread far and wide, carried on the wings of the wind to the farthest corners of the land. His friends, hearing of his misfortunes, were stricken with grief and concern. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar made a pact to travel to Uz. They had known Job for many years, had shared meals at his table, had sought his counsel in times of need. Upon arriving at Uz, they found Job sitting on a pile of ashes, his body covered in festering sores. The sight that greeted them was one of utter desolation. Job, once a picture of health and vitality, was now a shadow of his former self, his flesh ravaged by disease, his spirit seemingly broken by the weight of his suffering. They tore their robes in mourning and sprinkled dust upon their heads. For 7 days and 7 nights they sat with Job in silence, their hearts too heavy for words. The magnitude of his suffering, the depths of his despair, defied any attempt at consolation. Finally, Eliphaz, the oldest and most respected of the three, broke the silence. His voice, normally strong and reassuring, was subdued, filled with a mixture of sorrow and uncertainty. He had come to comfort his friend, but the sight of Job's suffering, the raw agony etched upon his face, had shaken him to his core. "Consider now," Eliphaz began, his words measured, his tone gentle. "Who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" He spoke from a place of deep conviction, his words echoing the traditional wisdom of his people, the belief that suffering was a consequence of sin, a punishment for wrongdoing. "As I have observed," Eliphaz continued, his gaze fixed on the ground, "those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." He believed that Job, despite his protestations of innocence, must have committed some transgression, some hidden sin that had brought this calamity upon him. Eliphaz's words, though spoken with compassion, carried a subtle sting, a hint of accusation that was not lost on Job. Had his friend, the one he had trusted, also turned against him, believing him to be deserving of his fate? Job, his voice hoarse with pain and fatigue, raised his head, his eyes searching the faces of his companions. seeking a glimmer of understanding, a ray of hope in their expressions. "Teach me, and I will be silent," he pleaded, his words a mixture of anguish and defiance. "Show me where I have gone astray." He longed to understand the reason for his suffering, the purpose behind the pain that had consumed his life. If he had sinned, if his actions had brought this calamity upon him and his family, he yearned to know, to confess, to make amends. But his conscience was clear, his heart devoid of guilt. Job's words, however, were met with silence. His friends, steeped in the traditional beliefs of their time, could not fathom the possibility of innocent suffering. They clung to the notion of a just and predictable God, a God who rewarded righteousness and punished wickedness in equal measure. In their eyes, Job's suffering was evidence of some hidden sin, some transgression that had offended God and brought about his downfall. They believed that by confessing his sins, by repenting of his wrongdoing, Job could appease God's wrath and find a measure of relief from his torment. Bildad, a man of few words but firm convictions, was the next to speak. His voice, though lacking the gentle empathy of Eliphaz, was tinged with a paternal concern, a desire to guide Job back to the path of righteousness. "How long will you say these things?" Bildad inquired, his tone laced with a hint of impatience. "Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right?" He implied that Job, in questioning the nature of his suffering, was challenging God's authority, daring to suggest that the Almighty was capable of injustice. "Although your children sinned against him," Bildad continued, his words striking at Job's most vulnerable point, the gaping wound of his grief, he brought disaster on them for their transgression. He suggested that Job's children had brought their fate upon themselves through their own wickedness, and that Job, as their father, shared in their guilt. Bildad's words, though intended to awaken Job to his supposed sinfulness, only deepened his anguish. To suggest that his children, his beloved sons and daughters, had deserved their fate was more than he could bear. Zophar, the youngest, was direct and uncompromising. He believed Job was deceiving himself, refusing to acknowledge his sin. "Will your idle talk reduce punishment?" Zophar retorted. "Should your defiance make men silent? You say you are pure before God?" He implied Job was challenging God's judgment. If only God would speak. God does not ignore sin, he repays the wicked. Zophar believed suffering was a consequence of sin. He urged Job to confess and seek forgiveness. Zophar's words stemmed from deep conviction. He believed confronting Job offered a path to redemption. Job, his body racked with pain, his spirit weary from the relentless accusations of his friends, felt a surge of anger rise within him. Their words, instead of offering comfort, had only deepened his despair, adding the weight of their judgment to his suffering. He lifted his head, his eyes blazing with pain and defiance, and let out a cry that echoed through the desolate landscape. "Why have you made me your target?" he implored, his voice hoarse with anguish. "Your hands shaped and made me. Will you now destroy me?" Job, though still clinging to his faith, grappled with the seeming injustice of his situation. He yearned for an answer, a glimpse into the divine plan that had brought him to this point of utter desolation. His friends fell silent, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. They had spoken on behalf of God, had delivered what they believed to be his judgment. Now, it seemed, the Almighty himself was about to break his silence, to address Job directly, to reveal the hidden purpose behind his suffering. As if in answer to Job's plea, the sky darkened, and a powerful wind swept across the desolate landscape. The air crackled with an electric intensity, and the very ground beneath them seemed to tremble. A whirlwind, its funnel a swirling vortex of dust and debris, descended from the heavens, its roar a symphony of power and fury. And then from the heart of the whirlwind a voice boomed, its resonance shaking the very foundations of the earth. "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" the voice demanded, its tone a mixture of majesty and rebuke. The voice, though filled with power, was not one of anger but of authority, of a wisdom and knowledge that dwarfed the understanding of humankind. Job, trembling, fell to his knees, overwhelmed by divine power. He shielded his eyes from the blinding light. A profound sense of insignificance washed over him. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" the voice echoed. "Tell me if you understand." The voice, powerful yet instructive, sought to guide Job. The voice unleashed a torrent of questions. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth? Who made its garment out of clouds? Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? Have you ever given orders to the morning? Job, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of God's questions, realized his limited understanding. He had questioned God's plan, but now saw the folly of his demands. How could he comprehend the mind of God? Job finally understood his suffering was a tiny ripple in God's creation. "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand," Job replied, humbled. "Things too wonderful for me to know." As suddenly as it had begun, the whirlwind subsided. The sky cleared, revealing the midday sun. The air was still, broken only by Job's ragged breathing. Job remained on his knees, trembling with exhaustion. He had looked into the face of God and felt humbled. Despite his lingering pain, he felt a profound peace. His eyes shone with newfound clarity and strength. His companions sat huddled, their faces pale with awe. They had witnessed the same divine power, yet were shaken. Job, rising slowly, approached his friends. He placed a hand on their shoulders, offering comfort. He had no judgment for their struggles. He believed they would find their way back to understanding. The voice from the whirlwind, though now silent, continued to resonate in the depths of Job's being. It had challenged his assumptions and led him to a deeper understanding of both his own limitations and the boundless nature of God's love. The Lord, having silenced Job's accusers, turned his attention to Job's companions. "You have not spoken the truth about me," he declared, a gentle rebuke. "My servant Job will pray for you," the Lord instructed, "for I will accept his prayer that you may not be punished for your folly." Job, his heart filled with compassion, readily agreed to pray on their behalf. He understood that their intentions, though misguided, had stemmed from a place of love and concern. And so, Job, his spirit renewed, offered a prayer of intercession for his friends. He prayed for their forgiveness and understanding. In the aftermath of the whirlwind, peace settled over Job and his companions. The air, once thick with judgment, was cleansed, replaced by humility and understanding. The Lord, having tested and affirmed Job's faith, withdrew, leaving a legacy of resilience. As the sun set, the Lord blessed Job, showering him with abundant blessings. His flocks and herds were restored, their numbers doubled, a testament to God's faithfulness. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to Job, their laughter filling his home. Job named his daughters Jemimah, Keziah, and Keren-Happuch, each name a testament to their beauty. Job lived to see his children's children, a testament to the enduring power of faith. His story became a beacon of hope, a source of inspiration for countless souls. The story of Job continues to resonate, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit.